Okay, hi, this is it. The very last video on John McCorder's book, The Power of Babel. This is the epilogue, titled Extra, Extra, the Language of Adam and Eve. So the epilogue deals with this question. I quote, haven't words from the world's first language been reconstructed? Page 287. In short, trying to pinpoint any such words, probably spoken 150,000 years ago, is a fool's game, right? Some linguists, according to the author, have argued that 27 words have remained largely the same, or at least recognizable throughout the ages. However, there are several obstacles that prevent linguists from satisfying, well, practically anyone. First, we can reconstruct languages that only go back thousands of years, not 150,000. And many of these even are educated guesses, no more. Moreover, hundreds, if not thousands, of language families have gone extinct even during these few thousand years, resulting in linguistic gaps that are all but impossible to account for. McCorder reminds us of something worth mentioning, even in a summary, that we should not reject a theory just because it goes against what we have believed for a long time. Galileo, Darwin, and others were often ostracized during their lifetimes because of the radical, though ultimately true, ideas they proposed. That having been said, and despite approaching the topic of the first words from the first language with an open mind, there are some currently insurmountable hurdles, hurdles that prevent any satisfactory answer. The main challenge is that linguists cannot reconstruct anything from that long-lost language. To take a more recent example, the English word every was once ever each. If this weren't written down, there would be no way for the linguist to know that every once existed as two words, never mind knowing what those two words were. Another complication is that ancient languages were not written down. And as we saw, when no written standard variety arises, languages change far more freely. Right? There's nothing to anchor them anymore. Again, for better or worse, right? So therefore, figuring out what the first words were like is quite impossible. In fact, because languages continually changed, quote, that not a single form of proto-world would survive is precisely what we would expect, right? Page 292. So if we accept McCorder's theory, right, that languages, must and do change, right? We would not expect anything to survive from 150,000 years ago, right? It will be changed, but it would not be the same, even if we managed to go back in time, say. Anyway, some linguists have produced a counter-argument that a lack of change should not be treated as a lack of evidence, but evidence in and of itself. In other words, if a word has not changed, based on the fact that many disparate languages still retain an element of it, one should accept this, even in the absence of an explanation. Tempting though this may be, it cannot be accepted. Quote, because of the fact that there are several thousand languages, all of them the product of several tens of thousands of years of evolution, it's not that words and some of them might coincide, but that we would expect them to. In other words, for no words to coincide would be unusual and would in itself constitute a mystery to be investigated. Page 293. There are only so many sounds the human vocal system can produce, so many possible consonant and vowel combinations that an overlap of words is all but inevitable. Right? Makes sense. Also, quote, it is impossible to distinguish between significant and chance resemblances. Page 297. Some linguists have pointed out, for example, that the word for water is similar across many languages. However, this cannot be taken as proof that the first ever word to be used to refer to water was, in this case, aqua. So, yeah. The possibility of coincidence aside, something else needs to be taken into account. Language mixing. Right? A similar sounding word for, say, water across many languages may indicate that some languages borrowed that word and does not necessarily mean that all those languages have a word like or similar to aqua because it came from one pure source. And speaking of purity, and given what we have learned about the inevitability of language change, it is all but certain that no word can remain unchanged for 150,000 years. We may not know how it changed. I mean, we certainly don't know how it changed, but we do know that it most certainly did. That's the constant we can rely on. Another thing worthy of questioning is this: why would a single word resist change, which is unlikely in itself, across several different languages? What makes, for instance, the word for water so special that it did not change across time and has now refused to change across disparate languages? It is clear then that this is unlikely to happen, and therefore no satisfactory claim of an original word from an original language can be made. I've mentioned the things we cannot know about the world's first language, but what about things we can deduce? Well, for the most part, these are features that the language most likely did not have, rather than the ones it did. So as McWhorter summarizes, quote, "The first language most likely had no inflections or tones. It overtly marked only what is necessary to communicating, without delving into such features as whether something had already been mentioned, that is, articles, shades of intensity of possession, or just how one heard something. In line with this, tense was probably marked only when explicitly necessary, with context taking care of the rest. The first language's way of packaging information would have been relatively telegraphic in comparison with European languages. Finally, a word could be used in a different word class, noun as a verb, verb as an adjective, etc., without needing to undergo any change in the process." Pages 302 to 303. Oof, if you made it this far from the very beginning of the summary, I thank you for your dedication. And yeah, I look forward to any questions you may have. Feel free to post them below and start a discussion or whatever. All right. Thanks again.